Hello. So, I'm here to talk about my thoughts on the videos of this week and the readings, and a little snippet at the end of a personal experience I have with disabilities in my life that kind of connects with the readings from this week. Um, to start off with, individuals with disabilities have had a bumpy road um, to get to where they're at today. That was kind of a big idea that I had seen in the text from this week. We had seen how, starting off very early in history, individuals were treated very inhumanely, from being thrown into rivers to being killed off to more recently, I guess, in recent history, being like chained up to walls and stuff. And this inhumane treatment lasted for hundreds of years that we have documentation for. Um, it seems like with lessening severity over time, which is, thank goodness. Um, but it's also crazy to think about this has lasted up until just the past couple centuries. Like, just the past couple centuries have we really seen these individuals with disabilities as people, which they weren't really seen as before. And it wasn't until the 20th century that advocacy had really begun for these people, and some change was really going to be seen. But this was going to be a process because, like I had mentioned, it had been hundreds of years that these people had been seen as inferior, and so the mindset of society was going to take some time to change. One of the biggest and most influential laws that was implemented was the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act of 2024. This set out to significantly improve the education of individuals with disabilities. But as we'll see, the implementation of these laws were not going to be easy, and they were going to be a little messy, as we could see in educating Peter. Now, the latest edition of the IDEA of 2024 obviously wasn't implemented yet when this video was first captured, but the first provision of it was first set in place, and it was within the last 20 years that first implementation of laws were being set for people with disabilities. So it was still kind of new around the time of this video. Now, it was going to be a struggle for Peter's teacher. Like I had said, society had had a stigma around people with disabilities, individuals with disabilities. So it wasn't surprising that Peter's third grade teacher was quite apprehensive when she knew that Peter was going to be in her class. She had not been trained on the inclusion of students with disabilities in her classroom. General education teachers were not taught about special education yet. So she was going to see how this was going to be a struggle. She had mentioned, like, wow, I don't know if I can handle this all year. But it was really cool to see through her efforts and her advocacy for Peter that he was going to be successful in the classroom. And she made a point to include the other students in helping Peter, whether it be with assignments or dealing with adverse behavior that he may display towards them, like hitting or kicking and things like that, how to properly deal with that behavior towards him. Our text really emphasized this cooperative learning to be beneficial for individuals with disabilities, and we can see that in educating Peter. And we can see that the child with the disability is not the only one that's benefiting from this. We can see that the other students in the classroom, his peers, are benefiting from this too, learning patience, acceptance, how to help others, and social skills they may not have gained in other typical types of situations. So this inclusion that we see was a big idea in this week's texts and discussions and stuff, and I believe that all individuals deserve the right to have inclusion in their least restrictive environment. And we can see that Peter was able to succeed in his best extent being in the general education classrooms. I had mentioned in my discussion post that I believe it got a little sticky for Peter as he got older, feeling that inclusion. Now, as he got older, he was in increasing need for community-based instruction, which separated him from his students. But because of his abilities, he needed this vocational setting to best prepare him for his future in the workforce. But he had mentioned feeling loneliness, or they had mentioned him feeling loneliness and having depression. And I mean, part of it came from the schedule that was separating him from opportunities for socialization with his peers. But I think ultimately it was his lack of communication. But I do think about maybe if there's a little cycle, if he doesn't have as much time with the people in his general education setting because of his need for the vocational setting, is he losing opportunities to increase his communication and his socialization? I don't know. It gets kind of sticky, and it was just kind of a thought I was chewing on for this week. And so this topic of inclusion and advocacy specifically had stuck out to me as big ideas this week. And advocacy is what I have a little personal experience on in my own life. So my stepbrother had gotten hit by a drunk driver when he was in ninth grade, and he got a traumatic brain injury. So he had to relearn his whole life. And now he came into my life a little bit later after his disability, but a couple years into me knowing him, Cuomo had shut down a bunch of homes for individuals with disabilities in the area, and that affected him. So he was like at this medical facility at the time, and he was only supposed to be there for a couple months. But because of Cuomo shutting down these homes, he had to stay there for a couple years, which I don't think was the best place for him for all of these years. So my family had to be the advocate to fight for him to get a home, even when homes started opening up again within those couple of years. Like, we had to be an advocate because they were in such high demand. Now my stepdad has been an advocate for my stepbrother's whole life. He needs everything. My stepbrother needs him for everything, and he'll continue to be his advocate for his whole life. And my stepdad doing that has kind of been something that I really admire, and one of the reasons I want to work with and be an advocate for people with disabilities, seeing it hit so close to home. So thank you for hearing me and listening to me this week. Bye.